Dr. Bill.
Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon to you at that time.
Yes, it is afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon or morning, afternoon. What are you?
Yeah, morning, 3 a.m. for me.
Oh, 3 a.m. Uh, well, good morning to you.
Good
3
to
a.m. is crazy.
you. Oh, well, Asia, right? So, like, you had Sebastian at the time from Taiwan. So,
Yes. Yep.
yeah. So, I'm in that part of Asia. I'm in Singapore here. So,
Okay.
mhm.
Wow.
How have things been going for you?
Very good. Very good. At least here, we're going the coronavirus is seeming a lot of people are getting vaccinated. So my university is going to go back to normal. So that's no more masks, which is nice.
Awesome. And how's your, I know that you're in a fat loss phase. Are you? Like, how's that going along?
It's going well. I think I'm in my getting close to the end of my third week, and I'll be honest. Last week, because I'm making it public, like I'm sharing things, and I wasn't real. I'm the guy who says go slow, don't be in a hurry. But I was like, this isn't working. I, I, I was like, this is going to be embarrassing. I'm doing all this sharing all this stuff and I'm not losing any fat, but I'm losing fat. This week it seemed to pick up a little bit more and I had new lows. So it just goes to show, as much as I tell people you have to be patient, I got to tell myself that.
Mm. Since you're talking about fat loss, right? Like some say go as fast as you can. Some say go like your methods go slower. Well, the people that say go faster because sometimes your motivation only lasts for such a long period, short period of time. Like which is, I mean, I understand your preference is sometimes like the longer the better. But like, do you have any recommendations for people that like to do it as fast as they can?
Yeah, I think I'm we just analyzed some data. So we did a rapid fat loss study last year, and I just finished analyzing the data. And we're going to be presenting that data at the International Society of Sport Nutrition conference in a few weeks. So I can't talk about the results yet, but I will say I'm changing my mind a little bit on some of my thinking of rapid fat loss. I think it makes sense to you want to lose fat as fast as you can without causing any harm, without losing muscle mass, without suppressing your metabolism, and you also want to get the biggest bang for your caloric buck, so to speak. So how much do I need to reduce my calories to lose the most fat? If I reduce them too much and I don't, if I, let's say I reduce my calories another 20%, but I don't lose any more fat, well, now that's stupid. That's foolish. So it's almost like this caloric deficit efficiency of fat loss is kind of where my head is now. So lose fat as fast as you want. Just try not to do it in a way that causes metabolism suppression and you to lose muscle mass.
So we're talking about metabolism. Like it's like some say when you lose after losing fat or weight for a period of time, you have metabolic adaptation. Like, can you explain that? And do you think it really happens, or is it a hormonal thing that happens? Stuff like that.
Yes, when I hear the word metabolic adaptation, the way that I describe that, the way that I teach it, if you lose weight, you're going to have a slower metabolism. If you gain weight, you're going to have a faster metabolism. Metabolic adaptation is a situation where you've lost weight, but your metabolism has slowed more than what you would expect it to just based on your weight loss. So it's something that you want to avoid, like the plague, so to speak, because when you have metabolic adaptation, you're now making it more difficult to lose fat into the future. And by virtue of that, you've just increased the likelihood that you're going to gain fat after your diet's over.
Okay. So would you sense see that you need to implement like the like diet breaks or things like that to increase the metabolism back to where it could be again, or is the diet break on for a prolonged period of time? Sorry, is the metabolic suppression on for a prolonged period of time, if you know?
Yeah, so when a diet break, the way that I define that, that's taking at least 1 week or 7 days off from your diet, sometimes 2 weeks or even more, depending on the study. And the way that I interpret those is in the literature, sometimes they've been shown to be helpful. They've never been shown to be harmful. You never gain weight from a diet break, as long as you go back to maintenance calories. Again, you're not overeating. So that's my first impression. They don't do harm, and some research would suggest that they help us. Now we have to ask, where are they helpful? They're helpful when you actually have metabolic adaptation, when you have negative consequences. So my lab is about to publish a study on diet breaks in resistance trained females, and we presented data on this last year, so I can discuss this. We didn't show any benefit. It didn't cause the subjects that were doing a diet break to lose more fat. It didn't cause them to maintain more muscle. But in my opinion, the reason it wasn't effective was because the diet didn't cause any harm to their normal physiology. They had high protein intakes. They were resistance training. Their caloric deficit was moderate, like 25%. So there was no place for a diet break to help them because their diet wasn't harmful in any way. They lost fat, but diet breaks will help, in my opinion, if you're on a long-term caloric deficit or if your caloric deficit is very severe. If what you're doing causes negative consequences, diet breaks would be more likely to help.
Okay. So like I'm just using it as an RP, Renaissance periodization example. Like they recommend you to have let's say example, you do a 12-week diet to have a 12-week, let's say kind of like diet break phase before going back on your diet again. So like 12 weeks, example, and 12 weeks again. Like, do you have a recommended time frame if somebody were to do a diet, like, 16 weeks might be too long, 15 weeks might be the best? Like, is there a certain time frame you think, like, be it physically or sort of psychologically, like it's better?
Yeah, I have an opinion on that. I think I personally wouldn't predict out into the future when we're going to do a diet break unless it's for a vacation. So I'm going to go to Orlando, which is like a vacation area, I don't know, in a month. So I'll take a diet break that week. Now I still won't go over my maintenance calories. So, but outside of vacations, I would base the timing of a diet break when somebody stops responding to their caloric deficit. So if it's been 2 weeks and somebody hasn't lost any weight, yet they haven't lost any fat, yet they continue to diet, that tells me that maybe they're experiencing a negative adaptation or a plateau. So let's bring in a diet break for a week or two and see if that can help you once you go off of the diet break to lose fat. That's how I would do it. So I would base it on when you cease to respond to the diet. Let me say that a different way. If somebody keeps losing body fat week after week, I don't want to interrupt that. I don't want to stop what's working. So I wouldn't put a diet break in there if things are going very well. Why change something that's working?
Got it. Yeah. So next was like, can I get you to kind of describe like satellite cells, or would that be comfortable for you to explain what that is?
Yeah, I can discuss satellite cells, and we're talking about for muscle hypertrophy.
Correct. Like in the simplest way, how would you explain something like that to somebody?
All right, so satellite cells are usually in the conversation of a concept called the myonuclear domain theory. So the myonuclear domain theory suggests that our muscles have nuclei, and skeletal muscle is unique. It has multinuclei within each muscle fiber or muscle cell. Most other cells of the body only have one nuclei. Skeletal muscle fibers have multinuclei. So satellite cells are kind of on the periphery of like on the outside of a muscle fiber, and they can translocate inside the muscle fiber. So they're satellite cells, and they can move inside the muscle fiber. And what we think is, at least according to the myonuclear domain theory, is that each of these nuclei is responsible for a general area of muscle hypertrophy within that fiber. So they will be responsible for turning on muscle protein synthesis or the genetic translation of contractile proteins. So if you can bring more of these satellite cells, activate them, proliferate them, bring them into the muscle fiber, they are now going to be able to cause growth at each of their surrounding areas inside the muscle fiber, ultimately leading to a larger or hypertrophied muscle.
And although there's, I mean, like, there's not much. This topic is not covered very much a lot. Like, do you think there will be a lot more focus on this in the next few years?
I don't. That's a good question. It's not an area that I've ever personally studied. It is interesting. Creatine has been shown to increase the proliferation of satellite cells. Resistance training does that. And again, it's still a theory. But yeah, I guess I'm not on top of that literature to be able to say if I feel like it's going to be increasing in volume. It's definitely intriguing to me, for sure.
And then based on, since we're talking about like trends, like based on where like we are in this year in this world, like where do you see like the fitness trends coming up, or what your take of fitness trends coming up the next year, this year?
Yeah, I don't know how because obesity is continuing to rise. I think there's going to be a continued emphasis on weight loss, but probably a little bit more importantly on weight loss maintenance. So yes, people lose body fat. Can they maintain a lower body fat level? So I would say there'll be a continued increase in that area. I think there'll be continued interest in intermittent dieting or alternate day fasting, intermittent feedings, that kind of research as well. I see that still being popular.
So a lot of people say that like doing intermittent fasting, like the intermittent approach, can be quite detrimental to muscle building. Like, what your takes on that?
I think if your primary goal is to build muscle, that intermittent dieting or intermittent fasting is not the best strategy to gain muscle. I think there would be research to suggest that what you should do is make sure that your protein distribution is approximately equal throughout your waking hours. And by definition, intermittent fasting violates that. It purposefully doesn't feed you protein. Now, it may be advantageous for fat loss psychologically. Like I'll say for me personally, I usually don't eat until 10 a.m. in the morning. I don't really call that intermittent fasting. Other people would. I just call it, I'm not going to eat until I'm hungry. So, but if I were very serious about increasing my muscle mass, and I am serious, I guess I'm just not very serious. If I was very serious, I would make sure that I have a protein feeding earlier than 10 a.m.
Okay. So yeah, most likely it's also, from what I read about, it's like because your MPS, at least if you have like one meal a day, it's only for like you have a spike of one time versus like 3 to 4 times if you have 3 to 4 meals a day, which is better for muscle building.
You're saying between 3 and 4?
Yeah, if you have 3 to 4 meals, if you have a protein spike, or if you have an MPS spike as compared to having one meal, it's more beneficial for muscle building that way.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, a study was just published last year, 2020, that showed when they increased protein at breakfast in resistance training males, there was a trend towards greater muscle mass gains rather than a very small amount of protein at breakfast. So that kind of, and that mimics some of the cellular data that we have as well.
So that, like, what do you think are the mistakes that people make, the common mistakes that people make in the fat loss phase, and after that in the muscle building phase?
A common mistake that people make in a fat loss phase is lack of patience. They expect to lose a lot more fat than what they are losing. And that, again, me too. I think I should be losing more than what I should be. So you start to question things. Is this working? Should I diet harder? Should I do more exercise? And my advice is take it a week at a time. You need to look at weekly data and then make an assessment, maybe even 2 weeks of data before you make an assessment. So that's what I think people make a mistake with a fat loss. I would also say that some people, and this is more females, they don't eat enough protein, particularly when dieting. So I think that's another mistake that people make. And then switching to what mistakes do people make when in a muscle building phase, I would just, that's got to be a consistency game. You've got to have a pretty good stimulus give the muscles the stimulus to adapt. So I think a higher frequency of training makes sense. Now I can't point to 5 different studies. I can point to 2 that would suggest that training one muscle group per week is not good or not optimal. Training it twice a week is more optimal. So just being consistent in giving the resistance training stimulus to the muscles and then making sure that you're feeding that with protein.
So just nice, like from what you mentioned, in both, it's all about time, like waiting. Yeah.
Consistency and patience and time. That's right.
Yeah, because like everyone looks at, for example, like a social media influencer, and then it's like you can see drastic pictures, or be it photoshopped pictures that you're like, why is this not happening to me?
Yes, and commercials, products, everything conditions you to think it should happen now. And that's, if I do nothing else, I hope to at least tell people the truth about how long it takes.
Like, are you reviewing any like supplements that you think are the essential? Do you think that any, not say essential, like supplements are more beneficial? Is it creatine, multivitamins, vitamin D?
Yeah, the 3 supplements that I take almost every day are creatine, fish oil, which has additional vitamin D in it, and protein. I take protein supplements. There are other beneficial ones. I just don't take them. But those are the 3 that I take every day, practically every day.
So in the old school realm of thought, like Poliquin would go 1 gram of fish oil per percentage of body fat. Like and then some would say just take a combination of 5 grams of EPA, DHA. What would be your recommendations if you have them?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I take 2 pills. It's probably 3 grams. So it's definitely a lot less than what Poliquin has suggested. That's a lot of fish oil. I don't think there's any research to. Do you remember what benefit he was suggesting that would do?
No. Although he said that like eventually like fish oil helps in lowering body fat, also lowering inflammation levels.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well,
yeah.
I'm aware of 4 different studies where fish oil, EPA, DHA increased muscle mass. 4 different studies. Now, there are other studies that showed that it didn't do that. But yeah, and there's even been some recent research that's challenging the healthy heart benefits. Like they're saying, and I'm not up to date on this, but we used to think that it's very healthy for the heart. And now some new research has come out saying, well, maybe it's not as healthy as what we once thought, or as good as what we once thought. But I still, like I said, it's still something I take daily.
So this is like training, where especially people that are getting older, like anabolic resistance, like if like people that are older need more protein, especially post workout. Is that correct?
Yeah, older people need more, I would say, more protein throughout the day than younger people. And we do have research that we're post workout, it's a good time to get it because the muscle cells, the muscle fibers are more sensitive to that protein at that time.
Does that so I was reading a book that said that carbohydrates doesn't matter so much as post workout. It's just throughout the day your carbohydrate intake. Like unless you do it for sports, do you think that carbohydrate intake post workout is very beneficial or immediately essential?
Not for normal people who don't have multiple training sessions or multiple events in the same day. There's, yeah, the research would suggest that if you eat normal carbs every day, you're going to have full glycogen stores. But like you said, if you're an athlete who has two practices or a practice and a competition that are 3 hours apart, it becomes more important after your first session of the day to get carbs so that you can replenish. But if your workouts consist of lifting weights for an hour per day and maybe doing some cardio, you don't have to prioritize carbohydrates after the workout. But let me just say, if somebody wants to, great. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't think the research wouldn't suggest that you're getting a benefit from that.
And then since you talk about food and things like there's a lot of different recommendations with regards to protein intake. So some recommends like the 1.6 to 2.5 gram per kg. So what's your recommendation on where protein intake will be, and does protein intake need to go higher, especially the lower body fat you have?
My advice is for people to eat 2.2 grams per kg, which is 1 gram per pound. In my country, we go by pounds. So part of my rationale is I like to keep things simple, and it's very easy to know how much you weigh in pounds and just eat that much protein. So 2.2 grams per kg. There is research to suggest that that amount of protein is beneficial for fat, for having a lower level of body fat. So I'm aware of about 4 different studies where resistance training people, if the only thing they increase is protein, they either didn't gain fat or they lost body fat. Again, 2 things there. They increased their calories solely from protein, and they were resistance training. The other thing is, since obesity is such a problem, the things that you can do to help you not be hungry, I think, are good decisions. And protein is the most satiating or the most filling nutrient that you can ingest. So the more protein you have, the less hungry some people will be. There's plenty of research to suggest this. Not all research comes to this conclusion, but several studies have come to that conclusion. So the reasons that I think it's beneficial to go higher than 1.6 grams per kg are it potentially will help with body fat levels, and it will help you be fuller. And that's beneficial for people who struggle with hunger. Like, I'm hungry a lot, so I want to do things where I'm not always hungry.
I agree with you. Like I get hungry, especially at night. Like at this point of time, like 3 a.m. So like I tend to eat more towards the nighttime. So I don't think so much about food. Like, what do you do to get you distracted away from food?
I'm going to show you this.
Oh, hello.
That's diet soda.
Okay.
So diet soda makes me feel full, makes me less hungry. The other thing is, I'm not hungry in the morning, so I don't eat. But I like to work. So as I'm working, if I can really get into what I'm studying, that tends to make me not hungry as well. Like I don't think about eating if I'm working. And then part of my fat loss phase, I'm walking for my cardio. So I walk at least 45 minutes a day. And I found that also helps. At least it helps like if I'm really hungry, I'll say, okay, I'm going to go for my 45-minute walk now. And that seems to help.
And have like, you found that like, so they said that people that don't sleep enough have, increased hunger levels. Like, do you know much about that?
About sleep cycles?
Yeah. And the increased hunger from not sleeping.
Oh, no, I'm not very, that's an area of research that I haven't read. The things that I have heard are if your sleep is disrupted, if you don't get enough sleep, it does seem to have a propensity to cause weight gain. Mm-hmm. So, and that's something I sleep very well. And since I started my diet, I've been tracking my sleep, and it's about 7 to 8 hours. It's always somewhere between 7 to 8 hours.
Awesome. Like, and now when we go to just a person, like, what has been of interest to you recently in like be it studies or personal? Like, what's been of interest to you?
Yeah, so I've been looking obsessively at the research comparing diets versus exercise for fat loss. Which one's better? Is it better if you want to lose fat? Is it better to go on to reduce your calories? Better to eat less food, or is it better to increase your exercise? So I'm currently updating my opinion on that area. And then the other areas that I'm really intrigued with is something that you asked me earlier when we first started, is this idea of rapid fat loss. How quick can we be? How aggressive can we be? So that's the other area. So those two areas, exercise versus diets, and then the speed with which we can lose fat. How fast can we lose it without causing damage?
Yeah, like, I mean, I was reading about like certain stuff also, like, let's say insanity workouts. They say that you can lose 1,000 calories in an hour with a workout. I'm like, okay. And then it's like, okay, so if you do insanity workouts 5 days a week, and it's all body weight, right? You lose 5,000 calories a week. Like, okay. Like, so what currently, at least, what's your take on it? Like, do you think it's more about exercise or it's more about nutrition?
Well, first, I don't believe you burn 1,000 calories in an hour from insanity. I mean, that would be very hard to do. It's possible. It would be possible, but you would have to be a special person to have that kind of intensity for an hour. So what do I think about diets versus exercise? Both are very effective for causing fat loss. I think it's a lot easier for most people to decrease their calories. If you're going to tell people, let's reduce our calories by 500 per day, or let's do cardio for till you exercise for 500 calories per day. It's hard to do cardio for a lot of people. Some people that are fit love cardio, but I'm saying for most people, it's easier to reduce food than it is to exercise for the same amount of calories. But if they did decide to exercise for the same amount of calories, the fat loss outcome is nearly identical, as long as the overall energy deficit is the same.
Not sure if you have research in this. Like, is it very first question is, do males and females gain about the same amount of muscle mass from training? Would you know?
Yes, they do on a relative basis, but not on an absolute basis. So I'll give an example. Females are typically smaller than males. So a male will train for 8 weeks. Female will train for 8 weeks. The male gains 2 pounds of muscle or a kilogram of muscle. The female gains a half a kilogram of muscle. So you look at that and you say, oh, the males gain more muscle. True, but relative to how much they had, they both increased by, let's say, 10%. So the males increased 10%, which was 1 kilogram. The females increased their current muscle mass by 10%, which happened to be a half a kilogram. And because they started with less, they didn't gain as much, absolutely. But relative to what they started with, they gained the same amount. So depending on how you define muscle gain will depend on whether you say they gain as much as males do or not. But I say yes, relative to their existing muscle, the amount of muscle they have, they gain just as much as males do.
And this is probably a more general question, like, is it very different for fat loss, like between male and females, besides being in the calorie deficit?
I think it's pretty similar. That's an area that I also want to do a little more research in. I'm very curious about that myself. So that might be an area that my lab also looks at, comparing males versus females with the same caloric deficit, looking at rates of fat loss. But based on the research that we've done, and I'm just thinking of our last fat loss study, it was very similar between males and females in terms of body fat percentage that was lost.
Like, with all the different forms of body fat scans, be it calipers, DEXA, like, does all of them have pros and cons? Like, do you think, like, which one would be the best if you can get it?
The best, most practical thing you can do, it lacks a little practicality, but get skin folds and have somebody test, pinch you in 7 different sites, the standard sites, which are like chest, scapula on your back, the back of your arm, your triceps, your abdomen by your belly button, your hip, and your quads, the top of your legs. Do those 7, and your axilla, which is kind of by your nipple and armpit area. Get somebody to measure those 7 areas, and you simply just add up how much fat was there. Because when I pinch this fat here and I measure this, what am I measuring? Fat. When I go into a DEXA, or I go into a bod pod, or I go and I use a underwater weighing or bioelectrical impedance, none of them are measuring fat. They're measuring something else. DEXA is measuring the density of tissues. Bod pod is measuring the amount of air that you displace. Bioelectrical impedance is measuring the speed with which an electric energy is being transferred throughout the body. None of those are measuring fat. But when you take a simple skin fold and you look at how thick that is, you're actually measuring fat. So I think that's the best thing. Just take skin folds and then add them up. Go on a diet. Does that number go up or down? I would also say, though, you might not have somebody that always wants to test you or pinch you in 7 different places. So a more practical approach would be these BIA scales that you stand on, because that can give you a very quick and very easy body fat percentage. Now, again, it may not be as accurate, but at least it's practical.
Okay. So a question came up. So what exercises do you propose for females? Resistance training in the shoulders, lats, pecs for fitness.
Oh, so what exercises do I suggest for females for the chest, lats, and what was the other one? Shoulders. For chest, I love cable flies. You get constant tension on the pecs, very little shoulder stress. So I love a cable fly. For lats, I like lat pull downs, single arm also, or unilateral. And for shoulders, I really like cable lateral raises, again, puts a lot of emphasis on the delts. And you get, the nice thing about cables, you get constant tension throughout the entire range that you don't get with dumbbells.
So I was reading study, not say study, like certain stuff. They said that for at least for chest development, the decline dumbbell press or bench press gets more pec development as compared to a flat bench. Do you think so?
I've heard that, and I think that research has come from EMG studies, and there are some limitations to EMG studies. So I personally don't put a lot of value into EMG studies because it's surface, and there's other research that has not matched EMG activity to muscle glycogen depletion. So the only way you deplete muscle glycogen in a muscle is if that muscle has been stimulated. So in theory, muscle glycogen depletion should match what happens on EMG, but that doesn't always happen. So I'm reluctant to put a lot of faith into EMG studies, and I could be wrong. So I don't want to. I'm not saying they're garbage. I'm just saying I prefer to base it on muscle glycogen levels. I think it makes sense to include both declines and regular flat bench in a routine.
A few more questions. Like, so do you think there's a point of where using calories is going too far, is it going too low be it for a male or female? And do you have a number where it may be too low for a male or female?
Yeah, I think a very good number for a caloric deficit to target fat loss is a 25% caloric deficit. In my lab, we found that level prioritizes fat loss, and it's severe enough. And that's not the best word. It's adequate to cause fat loss, but it's not severe enough to cause a lot of muscle mass loss. So I think 25%, when you start going above a 25% caloric deficit, there's other research that would suggest that now you start to lose muscle mass.
Do you have any question came in? Do you have any recommendations on preventing loose skin?
Prevent loose skin?
Hmm.
The one thing that makes sense is try to build up the muscle under the skin. So train for hypertrophy, because as the muscle volume grows, that would stretch the skin and make it less loose. So I think training for larger muscles would help in that situation.
And topic came up like fasted training, at least resistance training. Is that what are your takes on that?
Fasted training, I don't have a big problem with that, but I would suggest that as soon as you're done with the workout, that you would try to ingest protein. I think it makes sense to ingest protein after working out, but I don't see a need to have a pre-workout meal going into your training. Now, let me also say, if somebody's dieting and they're on very low calories, that kind of changes my thoughts. In that case, some people may need to have a pre-meal, a pre-workout meal, so that they can have an intense training session. But if you're not dieting, I don't see any concerns with or fasting resistance training.
Okay. So with that, like if you're not doing any, like if it's not a very intense workout, then like some people recommend that your pre-workout meal is like 2 hours before your workout, 90 minutes before your workout. Like, what's your usual recommendation for time? I guess it's also depending on the size of the meal.
Yeah, a lot of that research has come from aerobic endurance performance. So if you're running a marathon or a triathlon or a 15K race, eating a higher carbohydrate meal 90 minutes to an hour prior to those events has been shown to improve endurance performance. In terms of resistance exercise, there's research. The research really doesn't advocate eating a meal an hour before, unless if you're dieting. I think that changes things. I think in that case, you would have to experiment and possibly learning, do I need to eat an hour or 30 minutes or immediately before my workout to have a good workout? Because you want to have a good workout. But in my case, I typically don't need to eat. Now, I don't typically work out. I have worked out fasted, and it really doesn't have an impact on me. And remember this, if you're eating normal carbohydrates throughout the day, you're never going to be depleted of glycogen. You're going to have plenty of glycogen.
Okay, I'll ask the question first. Do you find any difference between male and female? Is it harder for females to lose body fat versus males? Or is there no difference?
No difference. I mean, females have a naturally higher level of body fat because they have more essential body fat. But there are females who struggle with fat loss. There are males who struggle with fat loss. There are males and females who lose fat easily. I've never noticed a difference in the amount. Now, the one difference is males can get a lot leaner than females. When males can get to 5 or 6%, I've rarely see that in a female. I have seen, females can get to less than 10%, but males can get just a little bit leaner.
This was my question. Vegetarian, so protein intake. They always say that you need to be mixing certain stuff to get complete protein. Like, does that really matter, or is it more about just same thing like protein intake throughout the day, increasing the total amount of protein to ensure you get enough protein levels?
Yeah, I ask dietitians that question, so I'm going to rely on what they've told me. Their advice to me is you don't have to eat it in the same meal. As long as you get it over the course of a day, that is fine for a vegetarian. So they don't have to match per meal, but as long as they are matching throughout the day.
Okay. What's your opinion about concurrent training, aerobic and resistance training in one session?
I'm going to speak to what I've learned recently. If you're dieting, and this is actually, and I have to be transparent. This is in overweight people who were previously sedentary, but so if you're in a caloric deficit and you're resistance training and you add cardio, you lose more fat and you actually lose less muscle. What I don't know yet is what happens if you're not overweight, if you have been training. So that's where my research is going to go next, the research that I'm reading. I'm going to try to have an opinion on that. I do think it makes sense to not do a lot of aerobic training if you're trying to build muscle mass. There's this theory of an interference effect. So if we do this again in 6 months, I will have a stronger opinion of what would happen in a non-dieting situation. But when dieting, surprisingly, adding aerobic exercise actually helps maintain muscle mass.
Okay. Question is, what hormones causes issues for fat storage in adipose tissue? Is it primarily from carbohydrates or for carbohydrates?
So, I mean, when you think of carbs, what carbs will increase is insulin, and insulin is an anabolic hormone. So anabolic could mean that you are more likely to store body fat. I believe that your hormones are secondary to your caloric intake. Your calories are the most important thing, and depending on what your calories are, your hormones kind of follow the lead. So the calories are orchestrating or directing the orchestra, and the hormones are kind of following that. So I don't emphasize hormones, I emphasize calories or a deficit or a surplus. One other hormone that would be considered is cortisol. When I ask, one thing I've learned from some of the coaches that I know, Paul Revelia would be somebody that I talked to recently about this, is that higher elevated levels of cortisol are problematic for trying to lose fat. So if cortisol levels are high, it's harder to lose body fat, is what he has, his opinion, and I respect his opinion.
Yeah. Is the cortisol thing also comes in like a, it's been with a Poliquin thing, like when your abdominal body fat, the number of, like when you pinch your body fat is high, is most of the time related to stress. So then, you know, you have some, like, be it adaptogens or something that helps in reducing stress.
Uh-huh.
So how much protein do you recommend for someone that's obese? Some say take a high protein intake, some say a low protein intake. What would be your recommendations?
Yeah, I don't recommend that they follow my normal protein intake, which is 2.2 grams per kg. I think somebody who's obese, they should focus on what's their ideal weight, what's their goal weight, and base their protein intake off of that. Because if they just have 2.2 grams per kg, it could be an obsessive amount of protein, depending on how much they weigh.
So next, so question is, I thought during endurance activity it is more optimal to have higher doses of glucose right before or during the activity in order to inhibit insulin release and use fats as to preserve glucose. Is that
Okay, so if you have carbs right before your endurance exercise, you do not have to be concerned about the insulin that's released, because exercise suppresses insulin. It doesn't, even if you wanted high insulin, as soon as you start exercising, your body gets rid of the insulin that's present. So you don't, taking carbs before your workout, until you start working out, insulin will rise. But as soon as you start working out, your body lowers insulin concentrations. And then the reason is, if you want to get on a molecular level, we have GLUT4 receptors in muscle fibers, and they become activated with activity. So you don't need insulin to lower blood glucose. The GLUT4 activation does that in the absence of insulin during exercise.
how's Paul? I mean, the last I met him was maybe 6 years ago in Australia.
Who did you meet?
Paul.
Paul Revelia.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. How is he?
Oh, he's great. His business is doing well. A lot of respect for him. He's a really, an elite level coach, gets people in fantastic shape. Yeah, he's somebody that I ask questions to a lot.
Awesome. Because I know he works with Dr. Joe.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I speak to Dr. Joe quite a bit too. So
cool. Awesome. Yeah. Another guy I have a lot of respect for.
So okay, how would a client with lipedema lose fat in the calorie deficit if calorie deficit doesn't work? Is liposuction the only option?
So I'm aware of lipedema as a condition, but I'm not trained, and I have not done research to know how to treat that condition. So I would just say I don't know, and I'm sorry I can't answer that.
No worries. How long does it take for glycogen to deplete before someone starts exercising?
How long does it take for glycogen to deplete? Before they start exercising. So generally, your muscle glycogen doesn't deplete unless it's activated. Your liver glycogen depletes overnight. So when you wake up in the morning, you have a significant reduction in your liver glycogen, but you almost have no reduction in muscle glycogen. The way that muscle glycogen is only depleted from activity or stimulation.
This is like, since you are in the university, how many studies are you supporting at the moment? Like, are you involved in at the moment?
So right now we we are in the middle of a protein tracking study for females, but we're not doing anything over the summer. So we finished half of it this spring, and we're going to finish it this fall. We're about to start a Legion Athletics fat loss supplement study. That's 2. We're also going to do a case study for reverse dieting. That's this summer, 3. And if you count, we're doing a narrative review on resistance training volume. So I would say right now we have 4 studies that are on our plates. 2 of them are larger studies. 2 of them are more just reviews or case studies.
Mike Matthews.
Okay.
Yeah. So has it been very hard to do these studies due to the pandemic?
Yeah, the protein tracking study we started last September, and we were 1 week into it, and we had to shut down everything. We lost, I think we had about 20, a little over 20 subjects. My staff was 20, so we had to shut down that entire study for the whole semester, which was so disappointing. Fortunately, we picked back up this spring, and we were able to finish half of our subjects.
Okay. So questions came in. Anything about EMS for fat loss?
EMS, is that electrical stimulation?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm not aware. I'd have to look into that before I would have an opinion on it. But I would say, as a scientist, I'm cynical by nature. So I'm going to say nothing works initially, and then I have to be shown data that it does. But it may be effective. I'm not aware of that area of research.
Since you are a scientist and you're a researcher, what's the best recommendation for somebody that's interested in the science route? Like, let's say science nutrition or science, things like that. And let's say interested in your path, what would you be your recommendations to give?
To become a professor?
Let's say to be involved, to start in the science realm of training or nutrition.
Yeah, I would say definitely take anatomy and physiology so that you can appreciate the body and how the body operates as a system. And I'm a big advocate of biochemistry, because to me, nutrition is biochemistry. But one thing I learned when I was taking my courses, if you want to study biochemistry, you have to take 2 semesters of general chemistry, then 2 semesters of organic chemistry. Now they let you take biochemistry. So it's a lot of chemistry to get there, and you don't have to study biochemistry, but I would say that if you want to really understand nutrition, biochemistry is the best class to take. And in terms of training, anatomy and physiology would be the best.
Yeah, I tried to enter sports nutrition, but I failed organic chemistry, so I was like, okay, not working out for me. I'll probably try attempt to do it again. But yeah, okay. That's increasing
organic chemistry is hard.
Yeah, that's I was like, I left school at 16 to play games. So after a while, I just didn't understand anything the lecturer was speaking about anymore. Okay. Does increasing VO2 max aid or correlate with increasing testosterone production, and the best way to increase VO2 max?
I don't think so. I don't think just because you increase your VO2 max. So, but let me say this. Maybe if you're very unfit to start and you take it to a normal level, possibly then, but I can't think of any reason why simply increasing your VO2 max would help with testosterone elevations. What was the second part of that question?
The best way to increase VO2 max.
Just training at a higher, training at the intensity, at a high intensity.
since you speak about intensity, right? Like HIIT and resistance training. So some say HIIT is better. Some research has shown, not say research, some have said that in the end, it's expending the same amount of calories. It's just about the time that's used in the workout, like 1 hour versus 20 minutes. What's your take on it?
So are we comparing high intensity interval training with normal aerobic training?
Yeah, a normal resistance training.
Oh, well, resistance training is going to give you the benefit of added strength and a much greater stimulus for muscle hypertrophy. High intensity interval training, and again, I'm defining that as like sprinting for like 30 seconds, then taking 2 minutes of break, and then sprinting for 30 seconds. That's going to do much more in terms of improving your VO2 max and fat loss. So that would help with fat loss, but resistance training would be more of a muscle hypertrophy stimulus.
Because I want your definition, because nowadays a lot of people say that they have a HIIT like workout that can last for an hour with dumbbells and all these different things. You go like, oh, really 1 hour, huh?
Oh, yeah, that's hard. And I guess if you were going to do that, I think more fat loss, but less muscle gain.
Can I just get you 2 more questions and then go?
Sure.
Since muscle glycogen doesn't deplete overnight, can someone have a late night dinner and carry out resistance training the next morning without breaking muscle for energy?
Yeah. There's going to be some natural amount of muscle protein breakdown. So during resistance exercise, muscle protein breakdown does increase, but so does muscle protein synthesis. And muscle protein synthesis increases more than muscle protein breakdown from resistance training. So even if you have a full glycogen storage, you're still going to have muscle protein breakdown. Maybe less than you would if you were glycogen depleted, though.
Okay. The next one is, what are the biggest pros and cons if you are not eating before a strength training workout in the morning in a fasted state?
So the con would be for people who need to eat food to have a better workout. That would be the con, like they're not getting as much out of their workouts. A pro would be you don't have to take the time to eat, 1. 2, you get to save those calories. Maybe you're hungrier later in the day. So that's what I personally do. And another con or another pro, I don't know if there is any other pros. It just, if you're not hungry, don't eat. But I would suggest eating some type of protein after that workout.
Since I mentioned that I'm only going to get you for 1 hour, it's almost about time. So like, where can people find out more information about your stuff if they're interested in? I know your IG, you make 3 posts a day, so it's almost that way. So like, where else can they find more information about you?
Well, the only place that I'm active right now is on Instagram, and my username is Bill Campbell PhD. So I don't have any other outlets at this time. I hope to have a website towards the end part of this year. So, but right now it's just Instagram. But I put everything on there. If I'm studying something, I'll tend to talk about it there or do a question about it. I talk about our research on there as well. So that's really the best place.
Apart from the NSCA book that came out, was it last year or early this year? Are you going to have your own book in the future? Any plans for that?
Definitely not over the next year. I think what I would do is, instead of doing a book, smaller pamphlets on specific topics, like maybe an ebook, small ebook, or report. Let's call them a report. I think what I would do is a report on intermittent fasting, everything you need to know, all of that science. Maybe another one on diet breaks and diet refeeds, all of the science that you need to know on that topic. Maybe another one on ketogenic dieting. So rather than have a book with everything, I think I would like to have more report-based publications.
For those that are interested in your research papers, is there a place to get them? I guess
If
on
you
your
follow
IG.
my if you follow my Instagram, I will, when I talk about my research, I'll give, usually I give, if it's freely available. Yeah, I don't really, like I said, since I don't have a website, I don't have my articles there. But a lot of our recent articles are freely available, you know, because they're in journals that make them freely available.
Last one. Would you ever be interested in coming into Asia to speak, or do you see probably due to these few years it being more online due to the pandemic?
I would love to go to Asia to speak. I don't like speaking online, at least not international. Like if I get more excited about traveling to speak. In fact, I've declined probably 10 speaking events this year, whether they be from Colombia. I did do one in China, or a virtual presentation. But yeah, if I'm going to do a talk, I'd like to do it in person.
And then the last one, if you do a talk, what would your topic be?
If I could choose anything, it would probably be on the best strategies for fat loss without losing muscle mass.
Are you free next year?
Yeah, probably next year is probably good for me. Yeah, that's
okay. So I'll email you about that, because I still think this year is not a very good year for international travel.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think next year will be the best. Okay, since mentioned this, I would thank you, Doctor Bill, for your time.
Yeah, hey, thank you very much for having me on, and I enjoyed our talk. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem. I like to say it's my pleasure, not pressure. So you have a good day. Thank you. And if I have anything, I'll tag you in this video. And if I have any questions, I'll just ask it to you.
Awesome.
Thanks,
All right.
man.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.